Hi, this is Jason from the Leadership Development Foundation. First of all, I hope that everyone is keeping as well as they possibly can be at the moment. Everyone is staying safe, following advice, and just basically looking after themselves and keeping on as well as possible. As you might know, I run a number of workshops, one of which is a session on developing resilience, and we thought that it might be useful to make this into an online video that people could take a look at whilst we're off to see if there's anything else that you could be doing to look after yourself, look after those around you. The first thing I'd like to say is, of course, don't be too hard on yourself if you're feeling that you're not being as resilient as you might normally like to be at the moment. It is hard, it's tricky. There are things which are outside of our control to a certain extent. So it's natural that you might feel under pressure more. It's natural that you might feel a little bit more, or less rather, resilient than you normally would be. That's okay. There are things that you can do to help that, but don't be too hard on yourself. You are coping brilliantly so far. Remember that all the way through. So let's start with what perhaps might be an obvious question at the moment, which is why are we finding it a little bit harder to cope? Why is it harder to be resilient at certain times? Well, let's think back to normal times, the ebbs and flows of the workload that we might experience across the academic year. If we think about the level of performance that we have, our ability to deal with pressure against the level of pressure that we're under, think of a high and low for both of these. Under normal circumstances across the year, we might find that we vary along this curve, which can split into 5 distinct sections. Let's deal with each of these sections in turn, and let's start with this one on the left-hand side. Let's just put my laser pointer on for a moment. So over here on the left, we have a very low level of pressure. Perhaps there are no particular deadlines or milestones that we're operating under. Perhaps we've achieved all of our objectives or targets for that particular period of time. Maybe there's no students around, or there's no demands being put on us. For a certain period of time, that's quite nice actually. It's good to have a break. But if that goes on for too long, we can find essentially it leads to boredom. There's not much to do, therefore there's no real reason to do particularly well at it. Our performance can be quite low at that point. Not much matters. After that, this next section along here, which is quite big, we can see that pressure has suddenly increased. Perhaps we now do have a target in mind. We have a deadline that we have to hit by the end of the week, the end of the month. Our performance can shoot up quite quickly, and then it can level off at a fairly high level, even though pressure might increase quite a lot. Now, this is known as the comfort zone, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea of a comfort zone in which we operate within, where things can vary perhaps quite a lot, and we are still able to deal with them and cope with them. What we might find on the next section on the right here is where we are stretched at certain times. Different departments will have different peaks throughout the year. For some, it may be induction week, freshers week. For others, it may be assessment time. For others, it may be clearing. Whatever the time it is, there'll be certain periods of the year where you are particularly busy. There's more work than ever, but your performance actually increases a little bit further. You're stretched, but you can still cope with it. Not for too long, not for an indefinite period of time, but for maybe the week or a couple of weeks that that pressure goes on for, we actually find that we're getting on even better than we have before. The next section, though, is where we start to strain. So as mentioned, our stretch zone might go on for a week, perhaps a couple of weeks, but maybe it goes on longer. Maybe it goes on for a month. Maybe it seems to last the entire semester. Performance is high still, but it's starting to drop. It's starting to drop until we reach the 5th zone, which, for want of a better word, is the panic zone, or the overly worried zone, if you like. Suddenly, pressure is so high that our ability to cope with that, our ability to perform well with that pressure, drops dramatically. Why does this happen? Well, it's worth thinking about what the pressure is doing to our bodies physically. Worth thinking about what pressure is doing to our bodies. Now, A lot of you may have heard of the fight or flight reaction. So this is an inbuilt biological reaction within humans that when we experience danger, risk of one type or another, our body prepares us to either fight for our lives, defend for ourselves, or flight, run away, retreat, get ourselves to a safe distance. Without going too far into the biology behind this, what happens is that our sympathetic nervous system reacts, it releases stores of energy, it raises our heart rate, our blood pressure, it increases and releases energy stored in glucose, and makes us ready to tackle whatever this danger is. Now, what should happen after that is that the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in once the danger has gone away to bring our bodies back into equilibrium. We've gone from being in long-term survival to short-term survival, and we should go back to long-term survival. Now, of course, that's all well and good if the danger has gone. In the past, the danger might be a physical threat to ourselves. Where the danger doesn't go away straight away, it means that that second part never quite kicks in the way that it should. It never has that chance to calm our bodies down. It never has the chance to get us to release that energy, gives us the chance to get back on a nice equilibrium. Whilst we stay in that state, that heightened state, that can then have certain effects on us in terms of our physicality, but also our emotions, our mindfulness, and our ability to really focus on what's there. The danger hasn't gone, so therefore we cannot yet exit that heightened state that we're in. So what does this lead us to? Well, if you think for a moment about how you know when you are under stress yourselves, what the signs are, what the symptoms are, how can you tell? Perhaps also, how can you recognize of those you're close to when they are under a certain amount of pressure? What you'll find is that there tend to be four broad categories in which the symptoms of stress can appear. The first of these are the emotional symptoms. So these are anything which affects our emotional level, our feelings of well-being, perhaps. This might include maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed, feeling out of control. It may be that you can't relax or quiet your mind as much as you'd like to. Perhaps you feel a little bit agitated, frustrated, a little bit moody. There can be physical symptoms. We're probably, again, very familiar with these. Everything from just nervous stomach feeling to headaches, maybe low energy. Perhaps we find it difficult to get to sleep at night. Perhaps we find ourselves clenching our jaw, grinding our teeth, or a whole other range of symptoms. Cognitive symptoms are the way that we make sense of the world. Perhaps we find our thoughts racing away with ourselves. Perhaps we become very forgetful. Perhaps we become more disorganized than we normally would. We can't judge things as well. Perhaps it's harder to be optimistic, or we find that we only can see the negative or pessimistic side of things. Finally, behavioral symptoms, the way that we then actually respond to the outside world. Perhaps we find that we lose our appetite. Perhaps we stop eating. Perhaps we're eating too much or too much of certain things. Perhaps we have certain nervous behaviors, nail biting, we fidget, we pace around quite a lot. Now, these are all normal. These are all normal reactions. So again, as I said at the start, you shouldn't feel bad that you're feeling some of these, if indeed you are. They're normal responses to stress. They're normal ways of our body essentially using up that energy that we haven't been able to get rid of in any other way. So these will happen. They're perfectly normal. When they become too much, when there's too many of these going on at the same time, that's when we need to start to think about, do we increase our resilience at this point? So with that background out of the way, let's think about exactly what resilience is then. You may have your own definition of resilience or your own perception of what it is if you want to think about what that might be for the moment. On the workshops that I run, I have a poll at this point where I ask people to suggest different words which come to mind when they hear the word resilience. I have some examples of previous sessions here. Examples include lots of mentions of the word strong or strength. Confidence comes up quite a lot. awareness, resistance, flexibility, persistence. Some one-off words that we have, which I particularly like, are reboundability, bounce back ability. But overall, is that suggestion that it's a way of getting through challenges. It's a way of dealing with what's in the here and now and thinking about how we can cope, how we can move on to what's next. Let's try and define the term further then. So, what is resilience? Well, as I mentioned on the last slide, there's ideas of flexibility, of strength within there, of overcoming challenges. It's really about having that strength of mind to face up to what's happening. The bigger the challenge that appears to you, the more you need to be resilient. And there are different levels of resilience. You can have what is known as passive resilience. And that's where you may not actively do anything, but you choose to maybe look beyond the challenge that's happening. You look to try and put it out of your mind, try and ignore it as much as you can, either because it's too big, it's too difficult, or too complicated, or beyond your capacity to deal with. Now, normally I would say that passive resilience is not the ideal response because you're kind of ignoring the problem. You're not really tackling it head on. Given the situation that we're in at the moment, though, perhaps there is room for a certain amount of passive resilience. There's not much that we can do as individuals to change the situation overall. We can obviously take our own precautions, we can take our own guidance and look after ourselves and those around us as well as possible. But the overall situation is a bit big. It's a bit big, let's be honest about that. So perhaps just trying to carry on as best as we can, maybe a level of resilience that we think is appropriate at this moment. However, there is also active resilience, though. Active resilience is the process of changing the way that we think, changing our response, changing how we respond to what's happening. You may have noticed I've used the word change a lot there. That is the idea behind resilience and active resilience. Doing something different, looking at something different, behaving differently, approaching things differently. How do we do that though? Well, again, what I would normally do at this point in the session is I would ask people to get into groups or pairs or just to think individually about what they do when they are worried, when they feel stressed, whether it's in work or outside of work. I ask them to jot a few thoughts down. Common things come up. People take themselves away for a walk. They give themselves 5 minutes. They go make a cup of tea, etc. But let's think about how we could maybe group these responses into more of a toolbox, more of a armory, if you like, of different things that you can do depending on where you feel you are currently. There are lots of methods then and lots of ways of increasing our resilience. Let's try and put those together into a toolkit that we can use then, something known as the 6 keys to personal resilience. So this involves a set of key skills that can be grouped together into different categories. If you can get a balance of methods within each of these 6 categories, the better the chances are that you'll be able to increase your own personal resilience. Let's go through these one by one, talk about what they are and offer some practical examples of how they can all be met. Our first key to consider is having a sense of purpose. This is the foundation for all of the other keys, really. We need to have a sense of what's important, what we're doing, why we're doing it. If you think back to the curve that I showed earlier on, at the start, on the one end, we can have boredom. If we don't really have any direction, we don't really have anything that we're striving towards, we can be a little bit bored. But at the other end as well, the panic sets in when we've lost track of what's important and what's not important. We can't see the sense of where we're heading. We need to have a good sense of purpose. We need to have a good sense of what's coming next and what we need to focus on. Now, of course, this is where the difficulty arises at the moment, in that we don't really know what is coming next. We don't know how long this lockdown will last. We don't know when we'll be able to get back to some sense of normality. So let's think of our sense of purpose in terms of short term and long term. Short term, that actually is quite clear, really. We need to look after ourselves. We need to follow the advice and the guidance that is being given. We need to wash our hands regularly. We need to make sure that we're not leaving the house unnecessarily. we need to make sure that when we are out, we are observing social distancing, and that we don't forget this. Really, we don't let our foot off the pedal with this. That's our short-term goal, looking after ourselves. There might be other short-term goals that individuals have as well. You may have children at home that you want to keep safe, and away from the risks that there might be. You want to look after their well-being. You want to look after their schooling. You may have other relatives that you need to look after. You need to provide shopping for or provisions for. You also may have a short-term focus in terms of work. What needs to keep happening? What continuation do we need to make sure is there for our students, for our staff? What legal obligations do we have perhaps in order to make sure that the university is still running? So in some ways it's quite easy to have short-term goals in order to keep going through every day. Where it might be harder is having a sense of purpose for the midterm. We don't really know if this is going to be weeks or months. We don't know if we're going to be back very suddenly on a relatively normal keel, or if it's going to be a lot longer. So I would say disregard the medium term goals and instead think about your longer term goals. It might be that for some of you, this period of isolation and a moment to step back from what's happening on a day-to-day basis has given a sense of clarity over what you want to achieve later on. Perhaps you want to refocus on your ambitions. Maybe there's a particular thing that you want to strive for later on that you have renewed energy for when the opportunity arises. Perhaps the new way that you have been living recently has given you other sense of purpose of what you want to do afterwards. I've got to know more of my neighbours since this has happened. We've connected through a Facebook group. We've been looking after each other, offering to get things from the shops when we've been going. I know people's names, which I didn't know before. And one of my things is to keep that contact up later on. Many of us have been connecting with friends and families through online video chats and other methods. Perhaps that's something you want to continue. Perhaps that's something that you want to not lose sight of. So a sense of purpose is very important. The stronger the sense of purpose, the better equipped we are to kind of handle the challenges, because we know what we're doing it for. We know why we're tackling these. We know why we are keeping on. So be clear about your directions and goals. You may have to change what they are. You might not be able to plan in the medium term, as mentioned, but you have got your immediate goals and you've got your longer term goals to focus on. What's the purpose of the activities you're engaging in? We know that we have to be very careful at the moment, so keep in mind the reason behind this. But remain true to your goals as well. You may have to shift priorities. You may have to change things around at the moment, but don't forget the longer term goals. Don't forget the longer term things which you want to achieve. They're still there and we will still get back to them later on. Our second key is trying to develop a positive mental attitude. Now, I appreciate that as I'm going through these may be far easier to talk about than they are to actually do at the current time. But what this is about really is about trying to get a balance act, not being naively optimistic or falsely optimistic about what can be achieved and what can be done, but also not to be overly pessimistic as well. In terms of being realistic about what can be achieved, be realistic about what you can achieve at the moment. It may be harder to do a lot of things that we would like to do right now. That's fine. That's what we have to just accept and not get hung up about, not beat ourselves up about. You may not be able to do as much work as you would like. You may not be able to do the same type of work as normal. Well, that's okay. It's not your fault. It's just what the situation is doing. There's only so much that we individually can achieve. We can all work together, and we are coming together as a community to look after each other, to support each other, both while we're at home, but also in the work that we're doing to reach out. But be realistic about what you can achieve yourself. As I say, don't be falsely optimistic, but don't be overly negative about things. Perhaps in terms of practicalities, it may be worthwhile not spending all day checking the news sites, not getting hung up on every single bit of information that comes out. Try and focus on maybe the daily briefings. Try and update yourselves once per day on what's happening, and the rest of the time focus on something else, something different. Obviously, we need to keep up to date with any advice and guidance to this. So this is not about ignoring what is going on, but not fixating on it either. Other things as well is maybe to find the positives of what you have got and what you can do at the moment. Maybe you can't do some of the work that you would like to do, but there's something on the back burner. Maybe there's some research you would have liked to have done for a long time that you've never had the chance to be able to get on with. Maybe you want to have a good sort through and tidy up of your M drive, your email, whatever it might be. Outside of work, maybe it might be things around the house that you've been putting off for a long time that you want to get done. Look for the positive opportunities within this. Look for the chance to spend maybe a little bit more time with your family or your housemates. Maybe the opportunity to connect a little bit more with other people remotely, which we'll talk more about in a second. Find what you can do. Find the positives that you can get out of this. Don't ignore the news, but don't fixate on it. Try and stay away from the sites as much as you can. Keep yourself up to date, but don't do too much. Our third key, connecting with others, is perhaps one of the ones which is mostly hit at the moment. We can't see the people we'd like to. We can't have as much contact with others as we would like to or as we would normally have. We may find ourselves missing people that we never imagined we would actually miss. That close proximity to other people, that opportunity to just chat, to gossip, to whisper to each other about things. So connecting with others is an absence. It is an essential part of the keys to resilience. So what can we do? Remember, people matter to all of us. We have to have our relationships ongoing. There has been a huge increase in video calls. As you may know, you've probably been engaged with these at the moment, both with your workmates and with your personal friends as well. These are really essential to keep going. There's lots of methods to use this. Maybe you've been using Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, FaceTime. There's lots and lots of methods to do this, lots of ways of carrying this out. Don't lose track of this. I find myself connecting with random people. I go for a run most days, and whilst obviously being appropriately socially distanced, I find myself smiling at people that I have no idea who they are. They smile back at us. People wave when you've moved out of their way to say thank you. This connecting with others is essential. It's very easy to be unconnected, withdrawn when we're in the house and we can't reach other people. And this is obviously particularly for those of us who are living on our own rather than with other people or with family. Make sure the connections with others are still kept, whatever they may be. Video calling, as I've said, is essential, but maybe emailing, maybe discussion forums, maybe chatting on Twitter or Facebook, whatever it might be. Make sure that you are reaching out to other people and there is still that sense of people being there. As well, it's also remembered that other people may need your help as well. You may feel quite comfortable on your own. You may feel it's quite peaceful actually to be away from everything else at the moment, but you might have friends who do need that extra help, who do need that support. Make sure that you're staying in contact with everyone else. The connection with others is really important in terms of these 6 keys. It's the one which is perhaps most suffering at the moment, but the one that we can really keep on top of if we make use of the resources that are available to us. Our next key, determination, is, as with our second key, positive mental attitude, one that is perhaps easier to explain, easier to think about than to actually do. Determination is keeping on, as I've said before. It's about making sure that you have a sense of not giving up and finish whatever it is that you have started on. Now, again, this can be harder at the moment because it is harder to get things done. It's harder to achieve everything that we would like to, which is why it really links back to that first key of having a good sense of our goals. If we know what our goals are, the more opportunity we have to see them through. If we think about short-term goals, as mentioned, then there's more chance that we will get them done and we can be determined to finish these things every single day. Maybe it's about having a flexible approach, being proactive to the challenges that are lying ahead of us. Maybe there's an opportunity to do a lot of reflection when it comes to determination. Maybe we could think back to things you've done in the past, challenges you've overcome, and how you've done them. Determination at the moment is a tricky one, but it's worth having a sense of keeping that direction, keeping that sense of purpose, keeping in mind what's important and what's not important, and be flexible about how you approach things. Whilst determination may be a little bit intangible, our next key, taking control, is one which is a lot more tangible and a lot more under your ability to do something about. On the one hand, taking control is about making sure that you are understanding your reaction to things, making sure that you're developing certain patterns within there, taking responsibility for what you're doing and your actions, etc. But really, I would say at the moment, what taking control is all about is about being organized. It's about being organized, looking after your time, looking after a sense of what's happening on one day to the next. When we're stuck at home all the time, when we're on lockdown, it can be tempting to let things drift a little bit. Mornings, evenings, all blend into one a little bit. It might be tempting, if you have to do some work, to do it late in the evening, early in the morning, wake up in the middle of the night, maybe you'll get on with something. However, it's really important to try and keep a sense of a pattern to each day. Try and work your ordinary working hours. Don't try and shift them around. If you work mornings, daytimes, evenings, whenever it might be, try and stick to that pattern of working if that will help you. Make sure there's a clear demarcation between weekends and weekdays. If you have children at home and you're having homeschooling, then try and keep to homeschooling hours the same as they would be if your child was in regular school. Be organized. Be organized in terms of what you're doing and when you're doing it. Have a sense of time management. Set yourself certain goals for the day, what you're going to achieve and what you're not. Don't be tempted to just keep working if you've not achieved everything that you would like to that particular day. Leave it till the next day. Make sure that you're not overdoing it. Be organized, take control of things. This also means taking control of the work environment as well, the work at home environment, or rather. Set yourself up in a proper place as much as possible. If you have a spare room that you can work in, then have that as your office. If you have an actual office, stick to that. Make sure that that's demarked from home and work. If you have somewhere where you can't work permanently, then make sure that work stuff is cleared away before you get on with the rest of the day. Take control of the environment around you and make sure that there is that sense of home and work still happening, even though you can't actually go anywhere. The final key is again one that we can look at in a lot more tangible and practical a way. It's about looking after yourself, making sure that the potential side effects of overt levels of stress, the physical, emotional, mental things that we mentioned earlier on, have as little impact on you as possible. Remember, stress, first and foremost, is a physical reaction of your body. The more you look after yourself more physically, the more you'll be able to cope with that stress. Now, there's various ways that you can do this under, again, normal circumstances. We are limited at the moment. We can't go to the gym. We can't go and play tennis, badminton, or anything similar. What we can do though is we can make sure that we're having our exercise. We have our daily walk, our daily run, or our daily cycle ride, whichever your preference is. Make sure that you take them. Make sure that you're not tempted to skip them for one day, if at all possible. Obviously, make sure you're safe. Make sure that you are observing social distancing when you are out, but do make sure that you are taking those opportunities. In the house as well, there's various things that you can do. You've probably come across the wide range of fitness videos that there are on YouTube and various other places, PE lessons and other things. There's also yoga lessons. Do take advantage of these. All you need is a TV screen and a floor space for most of them. There's lots of videos that have been designed to not need any equipment, any weights or anything like that. Do try and make use of them as much as possible. The PE lessons, of course, you can get your kids involved with if you want to have this as a shared activity. As well as that, there's also the kind of mindfulness, meditation aspects that you can do. Again, there's lots of advice online on how you can do this. There's apps, there's videos that demonstrate how you can look after yourself in these ways. Make sure you have your quiet time and your calm time. Looking after yourself physically can mean both being very active. It can also mean being very still and very quiet. make sure you're looking after yourself physically in the ways that are possible at the moment. Do make sure that you're keeping your exercise. Do make sure that you are eating as well as possible. Again, it's very tempting to sneak to the fridge throughout the day when we're stuck in the house doing nothing else. And I'm not saying don't give in to those temptations occasionally, but try and keep things even. Try and make sure that you are not overindulging wherever possible. Look after yourself physically. Stress is a physical reaction, and really one of the best ways to fight against that is to make sure that you are physically as well as you can possibly be. And those are the 6 keys to personal resilience. As a reminder of what they are, then a sense of purpose. Make sure that you are focused on what you want to do and what you want to achieve. We can't achieve everything at the moment. We have to let go of those medium-term goals, but we can have short-term goals, we can have long-term goals. Remember what they are. Remember your positive mental attitude. Try and balance out keeping up to date with what's happening in the news without fixating on it. Try and make sure that you're not being naively optimistic, but you're not being overly pessimistic either. Try and keep a good positive attitude towards things. Connect with others as much as possible. We can't see each other in the ways that we'd like and as often as we would like at the moment. Make sure that you're getting online. Make sure that you are connecting with other people in whatever ways is appropriate. Be determined. Be determined to get through this. We will make it through this. This will end. There will be a future. There will be a time after this. It probably won't be back to what we thought it was beforehand. There will be changes, and many of them hopefully will be for the better and for the positive. But be determined. This won't go on forever. We can make our way through it. Take control. Be organised about what you're doing. Don't allow things to just overwhelm you. Take control of your time. Take control of your organisation. Make sure that you're balancing out your home life, your work life, and keeping a semblance of order throughout the day. And finally, make sure you're looking after yourself physically. Make sure you're getting exercise. Make sure you're keeping yourself active. Make sure that you're letting your mind relax as well. Make sure that you're letting your mind wander off into relaxation, meditation, mindfulness, or whatever is the most appropriate thing. A balance between all 6 of these keys is really what you're looking for. The sense of purpose is the underlying one, but that doesn't mean it's more important than any of the others. Try and get measures within all of these. There's probably not much I've said which is going to be brand new to you. Most of us have a sense of knowing how to look after our resilience most of the time, but we do forget. We do get into bad habits. We do sometimes not focus on what we want to focus on. Don't let events take control of you. You take control of the events around you. And so with that point in mind, there are only 4 options that we have when we respond to challenges. Now, the first option, to change the situation, is not one that's really open to us at the moment. We can't change the situation. We can help. We can influence it. We can do all that we can to look after ourselves and follow the guidance to try and work through this as quickly as possible. But we can't change it. It has to end itself, essentially. So if we can't change the situation, we could instead maybe change our attitude. And that's what we've been talking about on this. Changing the way that we're looking at things, changing our perspective, changing our methods, changing our view on things. It's not as easy said as done, really, but what we can do is work through the 6 keys that we've had today to try and change the way that we view things. We can't change what's happening, but we can change how we're reacting to it. The third option is to leave or remove ourselves. Well, again, this isn't an option that is available to ourselves right now. We literally cannot leave our houses more than is recommended. We can't remove ourselves from the situation. We have to bear with it. So that's another option, which again, we cannot do. So instead, we can have option 4. We can change ourselves. Changing our attitude, number 2, is small nips, tucks here and there, changing perspective, changing the way that we're looking at things. Number 4, though, is changing ourselves wholesale. That's harder to do, and that might be something which takes longer than just the current period that we're in. But we can start working towards that now. We can start to change our overall attitudes, our overall ways of being, in order to leave ourselves more able and ready to cope with whatever challenges come back in the future. If we have to go through this again, we'll know what we did last time. We'll know that we had certain methods in place to help. We'll know how we got through it, and we can use that information to help next time round. So I hope that's been helpful. As mentioned, there's probably not much in there that you haven't thought about yourselves before, but it's about remembering and compartmentalizing the information that you have. We have lots of coping strategies already. We know what we do when we're feeling worried, when we're feeling concerned. We know what other people do. It's remembering to put those in place and using them when we really need to. Some final considerations for yourself. It might be that you need to focus on one or more of the keys to resilience to develop. You may do very well on some of them already. Maybe you are very good at organizing yourself. Maybe you're very good at keeping yourself physically active, or you have a good sense of your goals. But some of the others need a little bit more work on them. Find out which is your priority to develop and think about how you might do that. Think about what practical approaches you will use. As mentioned on the course that I run, we get people to jot things down onto post-it notes, and I then get people to share them as much as possible so that by the end of the program we get a very long list of things that people can do. Lots of things that come up which we haven't even mentioned today. Lots of escapism, lots of reading books, lots of taking long baths, lots of watching TV, playing games, whatever it might be. All of these things are useful and appropriate. Make use of your video chat time with other people and ask them, what do they do? How do they manage their particular stress levels? Get a method that you can use. Get something which is in place that you can go back to and rely upon and use. There is a lot more guidance put together by our wellbeing team. You can find it at the link on screen at the moment, or if you just search on the JMU staff homepage for wellbeing, you'll get through to there as well. There's guidance there on how to look after yourself. There's references to resources online where you can find out more about some of the things I've talked about today, such as mindfulness, exercise methods, techniques. Do make use of it and don't feel as if you are on your own. There's a whole community around the university there to look after you, to help and to support you. We're there for each other. We want to get through this and we want to see each other again as soon as possible. If you have anything that we can do to help out, get in touch. Find us and don't feel that you're on your own in these times. Take care of yourselves and I'll see you very, very soon.